Hello and welcome to the Tournament Poker Project. From Essex, my name's Jon.
And I'm the Tain.
And we are two non-professional poker players. And this is our journey to get better and nearer to a professional level of poker, to be able to go and play and compete in the World Series of Poker. We're quite near the start of our journey. We'll be doing this for 6 months now, Tain?
I think about 6-8 months.
6 or 8 months. And I think it's fair to say we're getting better. We've not had any massive binks, like far from it, but we're definitely, we've hit quite a few final tables in hundreds of runner fields. My bankroll's starting to stay. I haven't topped up for a long time. I'm like about $450 now, so that's coming along online. We're on the path. We're going the right way.
Yeah, definitely. I need to keep my focus on where my skill edge is best, and I'm finding it very difficult to do that because basically I'm so much better at MTTs, big field MTTs, than I am at anything else, and it's noticeable. If I sat down one morning and decided, right, I'm going to enter 5-6 MTTs today, I expect to min cash in at least one or two of them. Yet I'll happily, instead of doing that, roll off these quick fire spin and go or sit and goes or anything like that is over within 15-20 minutes, where I'm still playing well, but the variance is incredible. And you can't help that. Like one of them, I outplayed the table massively. I was brilliant. I was the chip leader, but because it's a max game, after 20 hands, it's all in. Just lost 4 times in a row, and I went out without cash, and 2 other players got first and second. It's just like that's impossible to be able to combat. The variance is horrible, and that has impacted me significantly.
Such is the game.
But I'm definitely getting better.
Nice. Oh well. If you're listening in and you've been with us since the start, I hope you've been coming on this journey with us and you're learning as well. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. So usually we'll analyse a hand. So although we are going to be talking strategy, we're going to be basing this around a typical exploitable player. So we're looking at someone who's a loose passive player. But before we dig into that, we were just going to talk a little bit about a few different flops, like flop types, and who would have the nut advantage on each one. So, Tain, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, of course. So basically, we're doing our best to learn GTO, so we know how to deviate from it. But it's quite difficult to hear about GTO strategy, DTO ranges where someone's playing the correct cards, they're playing the correct bet sizing, they're playing the correct flops. And it's easy to respond to that because you kind of know the answers. You know what they're playing and you know what their ranges are, and you know what mistakes you shouldn't be making. But when someone plays down the Saxon Arms, call out to our local boys down in Whittam in Essex, and they've never even heard of GTO, it really does impact how our strategy should look. And I think I think I nixed this off the Upswing Poker podcast. Sorry, Upswing, we're hijacking things that you've gone over. And there's 3 very similar flops where previously all 3 of them I would have said were in favour of the imposition raiser of their range. But the truth is, it actually isn't. If you know GTA ranges, one of them's significantly in favour of the imposition player, one of them's a bit of a mix, and one of them's actually counterintuitively in favour of the big blind. So the scenario is any old imposition player. For the sake of argument, hijack, mid position, and we're playing against the big blind. So the big blind will have the biggest possible range at that point because they're defending a lot more. And the imposition should be relatively strong against that. Yet on one of these boards, the big blind counterintuitively has complete strength. And once we start thinking about it that way, it starts making a lot of sense. But as soon as I start looking at these players down local games at the micro stakes online where they're not playing GTO, everything that I've just learned goes out the window. So it's then I wanted to pick Jon's brains, and hopefully any users at home, if they want to pitch in after the episode, and just try to work out why things are different, why we're adjusting, in what way we should be adjusting, and how bad is it to try to stick to GTO in this position. So that's the other side of it. If GTO is unexploitable and we're not sure how to respond, is sticking to GTO so significantly bad that we're a fool to continue that way? Does that make sense? Even if we're not overly sure how to respond, sticking at GTO is such a criminal move against such blatant exploits. What are we doing? So anyway, I digress. So these are the three scenarios, the three flops that I believe the Upswing Poker podcast went across. The first one is Ace King 6. And for the purposes of this, we'll just assume it's rainbow. So it is purely on the strength of the cards. Now, this one, the imposition player has a significant nut advantage because playing GTO, the strongest hands on that board are aces and kings for the sets. And both of them, the big blind should be free betting. So when the big blind doesn't free bet, we know they don't have either of them hands. So even if they've got a set of sixes, which is the next strongest hands that they could have, or possibly ace king, but again, we expect them to be free betting ace king, so they might not even have ace king in their range. So they're going to be playing the very best of their range, is most likely to be weak aces, weak kings, or a set of sixes is the best. And even if they've got a set of sixes, the fact that we've got aces and kings in our range means they're at a massive nut disadvantage. So we can bet with abandon, we can overbet, we can afford to have tons of bluffs because it's supported by tons and tons of value hands, and we can bet big even though that's counterintuitive, we've got such an advantage in that position. We want to be betting all of our bluffs for a big size because we so often have good value hands as well. So we want to give the big blind opportunities to call us because we're making that move with trash, but they'd have to do that to stay balanced against what is an extremely strong range. So then the next flop is the Ace King 10 board. Now, again, what I just said still applies. The imposition player does have the aces, the kings, and we'd expect that the big blind doesn't have them because they've not free bet, but they might have tens. Tens might be a calling hand. It depends on stack depths and things. So the tens now is a bit stronger, even though it's the equivalent of a six. It's still bottom set. The tens is in there, but the big blind does have queen jack offsuit in their range because they've got a massive range, and that is now superior to the aces and the kings that the imposition player might have. So the actual nuts on that board of queen jack off or queen jack is only held by the big blinds. Now, the imposition player might have queen jack suited, so it's not fully there, but all of a sudden the imposition player can't bet with complete abandon, can't overbet the pot, throw chips everywhere because they don't have enough of the nuts. The out of position player's got a lot of queen jack off that now mean there is a chance that even with some of their strongest hands, they're not winning. And that changes how you play. It means you should be doing smaller bets. You should have a bit more of a check-in behind range.
But we'd still consider like pocket aces and pocket kings, pocket tens from the imposition opener to be quite nutty, right? I mean, I know obviously if you've got a set of aces on that board, you could lose to queen jack, but does that mean that the big blind's got the nut advantage, or?
So because there's a lot of queen jacks out there. There's 12 combos of queen jack off. So that is quite a number, and that is that is the more likely part of the big blinds range. So even though they've got a wide range, even someone not defending the big blinds very well, maybe not even playing GTO, will still be having Queen Jack off in their hand. It's not so much that makes all the difference to the nut advantage. It's more that means that the in position player shouldn't be over betting and shouldn't be betting for a big size. They can never have the Queen Jack off nuts, and the big blind can, so they should always be betting small in that position. So that has taken away their opportunity to overbet. So if you're sitting deep, that's now a barrier to you getting the SPR down. Whereas on the Ace King 6 board, you can be trying to get that SPR down as quickly as you can. Whereas Ace King 10, you've got that. If you're betting big and you're getting called, they've got a lot more Queen Jack in their range, and you need to be really cautious of that because your aces and your kings are well behind. Okay. And that it just slows you down, and it completely changes the dynamic of the post flop play. And then the final board is Ace King King, and you might think like I did that is all over the in position player. They've got all the aces, you know what I mean? They're playing Ace King, they're playing Ace, they're playing kings. The fact that the big blinds should be raising aces and kings means that they don't have that significant nuts at this point. But there's very few combinations of aces and kings in that position. When you compare that to how often the big blind has king X offsuit or even king X suited that the in position player doesn't have. So if we consider that both of them have most of the aces, so they're irrelevant, they're behind the balance each other out, the fact that the big blind has king 3 off, king 4 off, king 5 off, king 6 off, that the in position player never should be raising with, completely counters the number of combos of aces and kings that the in position player will have. So in that position, the big blind probably has the nut advantage. Even though it's not the nuts, they probably do have the nut advantage. They have the functioning nut advantage because they've got so many of that set. That doesn't mean it's not dynamic and it can change, but that again means that the big blind maybe could even be coming out donking. The in position player should suddenly have a lot more of a checking range, check behinds, and the in position player should never be betting big ever because there's actually a significant chance that they're behind anytime that's called. And that means that the big blind can start really playing perfectly. If I was the in position player and I was betting big, so the big blind's check to me and I bet big on an ace king king board, the big blind throws away when they've got nothing and calls and check raise. Well, wouldn't even be needing check raise, but they can call with abandon when they've got that king. So even though that makes it a little bit readable, you're allowing someone to play perfectly against you, and that's like the worst possible thing. So apologies for the long-winded three scenarios, but just to go over them, we've got ace king 6 as the in position nut advantage, ace king 10 as the kind of mixed nut advantage, and then ace king king we're actually saying is probably GTO wise the big blind's advantage. But a very familiar situation for us playing micro stakes, playing pub games, is that people very, very much don't defend the big blind anywhere near as frequently as they should. They don't check raise or free bet anywhere enough hands. There are players that I play against who might have never free bet other than when they're short stacks and they're shoving. They simply have zero free bet range. If they've got even with aces, if someone's already raised in front of them, they call. That's how they play. They'll raise with aces if they're the raised first in. They might even raise a limper, but there are people who just don't do it. So we can't read into that. So all this, the big blind's got the advantage on ace king king. If that big blind's never calling or with the king 3 off, king 4 off, king 5 off, they don't have the nut advantage. So how do we know that? How do we counter that? And what should that mean to our GTO play. How much money are we leaving on the table if we assume that the big blind's got the nut advantage in a position where they never have the nut advantage ever because they don't know how to defend properly?
Well, a lot. I mean, the short answer is a lot. This is why GTO's what you learn as a baseline, isn't it? And a kind of something to benchmark against, and then you hugely adjust your strategy based on the mistakes your opponents are making according to GTO. So if someone's not defending their big blind wide enough, then they haven't got all of those kings, and all of a sudden ace king king isn't the big blind's nut advantage. So a huge adjustment you'd make there is probably to bet it a lot more, just to see bet it and try and get them to fold it, whether you've whatever you've got there. Yeah.
So one thing I thought would be helpful is if we, probably as part of a series of pods, but if we pick out what we'd consider the most common weakness one of the players we're playing at this level against demonstrates, and then try to pick that apart and work out what they're doing, what that means to GTO, what that means to exploitative play, and the best way for us to use that information. Like it could be that we bet bigger pre-flop in certain scenarios, or it could be that we actually develop a limping range. It depends on what the player is.
Yeah, well, let's go with the mistake of then that someone's not defending their big blind wide enough. So what does that mean, first of all? Like that means they're only defending their big blind, they're only calling open from the big blind position when they've got a pretty strong range. So it's more their range is more defined when they get to the flop, instead of the usual difficulty playing against the big blind of if the flop comes down quite middling, they may or may not have it. They're playing a lot of pocket pairs, they're playing suited connectors, they're playing suited kings, like all of them. I think they play all of the suited queens as well, don't they? In fact, it's pretty much all suited hands you play from the big blind against most opens at certain stack depths, like at deep stack depths. So they're not playing wide enough. So when the flop comes, you've not got that tricky, right, what have they got? They're kind of a bit more of a readable range.
Would you agree that even a loose passive player doesn't call the big blind enough? So against our level, where they don't understand ranges, they don't understand pot odds, they don't understand that once you've already got a big blind in there, you should be defending that because your odds are so much better.
If we're calling them a loose passive, then they'd probably be calling all of their big blinds, probably calling too much. By definition, like a loose passive is someone who's playing a lot of hands passively, so they're basically calling a lot. So if we're talking about someone who doesn't call the big blind enough, then I would say that's probably a tight passive player.
Sure. I mean, is that where do you want to go through that type passive player and look at their leaks?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So type passive, I have made a little list just to help me on different types of player. Would you agree that some of their weaknesses might be obviously the one we just discussed? Their range is too tight for their position, and I think that's most pronounced on the big blind. That's why I've clung to these three scenarios where it's in position versus big blind, because it's most obvious mistakes. People have got money invested in that pot, and every time they fold that, they've got -1 big blind, and that's per 7, 8, 9 rotations. Hands. So multiply that by 10, they're losing guaranteed 10 big blinds through passive play. So that's a huge leak. They limp far too often because they're passive, both open limping and limping behind if there's been a raise. Too little action when they're short stacked. Top heavy range, so they've got no balance. It's pretty linear and it's pretty much weighted to the top end. Unwilling to get value from their value hands. Now, if they're tight passive, is that related to monsters under the bed in that situation?
Yeah.
So even when they've got value hands, they're not doing much with it.
Yeah.
Readable strength post flop. They check call too often post flop. Poor. So when we discuss people being tight, are we assuming that then relates to their post flop play if it's passive? They're calling too often, or are we saying that a tight passive player is scared of monsters under the bed, so they're folding too often?
Yeah, I think they're just folding too often in general. So, but when they are staying in the pot, they're generally calling as opposed to raising. So, what we know about this player is that you can probably bluff a hell of a lot, and you're going to get a lot of folds. When they do stay in a pot with you, they've got that linear range. They've got those strong hands. Very strong hands, surely they're going to raise a bit. They may well make it obvious, but if we haven't got that information, then we can only assume they are just staying in too many hands and are going to be betting calling with a linear range. So we can bluff a lot. As soon as they're calling and playing back, then we only continue with our super strong hands. Sure. I think it's probably as simple as that with this type of player.
And would you agree that a tight passive player has a poor understanding of relative hand strength? You know, for instance, do they overvalue top pair because they've been playing passively, because they've not been playing enough hands, and they've been sitting there twiddling their thumbs? When their ace king does hit a king on a king 5-4 board,
definitely. I think a lot of them do. Yeah, like we're talking about more beginner type players that, yeah, they're sitting there folding everything. Suddenly they get ace, a top pair with a good kicker, and they ignore the fact that there's, a flush out there, straight out there. They just overvalue all of it. And that's what I'm saying. That's when you kind of read what hand they've got. They've got that strong hand, and you really overbet when you've got a super strong hand. If you've hit a set, for instance, say the flop comes ace king 7 and you've got pocket 7s and they're staying in the hand when you bet the flop, bet the hell out of the turn and the river. Try to get stacks in. One thing I've been learning about at the moment is when you've got a stack, so obviously really deep, you can't do this, but as much as possible, you want to be raising the turn and then the river so that you've got the stacks in by the river, but that it's a geometric increase. So you're betting the same portion of the pot. So you might say you're betting 150% pot on the turn, which leaves 150% pot bet behind, which is the stacks in, if that makes sense. Yeah. That's kind of what you want to be aiming for. And if you've got pocket 7s on an ace king 7 board, and you've got a tight passive player who started calling or even raising back at you, he's got that ace. Maybe he's got ace king. All right, he could have a set of aces, a set of kings, but that would be monsters under the bed. I think you've got to go for it and assume he's overplaying, like we said, overplaying that top pair, top kicker, or maybe even 2 pair. I think it'd be very unlucky to be run into a set there. Yeah, I think you just got to get max value when that comes along.
Okay, so going back to our earlier ace king scenarios, we're playing a tight passive player and the flop comes out ace king 6. Now, if we're assuming that the passive player is in the big blind, in position should have the significant nut advantage, because the big blind has so much junk. They should be calling 65-66% of their range. because they've got the investment and they should understand how that plays.
But if they're tight, they're going to be calling less than that, but it's still going to have, you know, a fair chunk of the range that doesn't have aces and kings in it. And same thing. I think we need to bet the flop. I think we need to see bet, and they'll go away if they've not got an ace or a king.
Well, one of the things we mentioned on the ace king six board is that the big blind should always be raising at most stack decks should mostly be raising with aces and kings, and the fact that they didn't, and we've eliminated that from their range, means that they've lost significant nut advantage. But they might not even have ace king, depending on the player, and if they're trying to play big blind defend but they're aggressive, they might be betting all three of them. They might be betting most of their aces from that big blind free betting, and the fact that we're taking that out of their ability means that aces, kings, and ace king are now very much in the big blind's range, and the big blind's range is tighter. So we can't surely be big betting, over betting that flop. Ace king six has now suddenly swung against us, even though we're still winning. We've still got the nut advantage. We can't be betting big. We now need to be cautious, and we now is the right strategy in this position to continue betting, but we need to use a small size.
Yeah, I think it was always a small size on the flop. It should always be like a quarter or a third.
Well, ace king six is a big bet. We should be using 2/3, 3/4.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not as 100% range bet, but it's just we've got such a nut advantage in that position that most of our range should be over betting to try to get the SPR down. We've got the best hand so often that even our best bluffs need to be betting big to support them value hands.
But now we've got this type passive player that's decided to stay in the hand. Suddenly, it's not so nutty for us because they're going to have more aces and kings in their range.
So is that our first agreed adjustment? That when someone is playing too few hands and their range is skewed into the linear top half, our big bets diminish.
Yeah, and we, like you say, we could still do a small one, and they'll fold. You know, it's exploitable. We were exploiting them really because they'll still fold if they've not got an ace or a king, and if they call, they've probably got the ace or a king, and we can play accordingly. Obviously, if we've got a really big hand, if we're sitting there with pocket aces or pocket kings or even the pocket sixes, we can go mad and try and get their stack in. But otherwise, we're just betting smallish on the flop, trying to get a fold out of the big blind. And then when he plays back, if we've not got it, we can just happily fold, check fold.
So what you've mentioned there, that's given me a lot of thoughts that have popped around everywhere. So we would be making a massive deviation from GTO, if when we've got the best of it, so we've got, I don't know, pocket aces on an ace king six board, we exploitatively take advantage of the fact that the big blind's range is so skewed linearly in the top 10% of hands that they also are likely to have a piece of that board, and they're going to pay us off for that. And that would, because we're not doing that with any bluffs, that would be super deviation. Are we happy that the player is playing tight passive? That's not going to make a difference. That is an exploit that we're happy to completely give up. How exposed that leaves us to, because that would be leaving us massively exposed to check raises, to thin value, to basically them folding out absolutely all of their crap and only calling us the best of it.
Let's put that question to the test. So, all right, let's say we're going to bet. We're going to bet our range quarter pot, 1/3 pot, but we've not got an ace or a king or a six. We've not actually got a strong hand. We're just doing it with most of our range because we know that he folds a lot. And then he check raises us. Yeah, we just fold.
Sure. So, as a part of this, is one of the things we first need to look for them that this is the type of player who doesn't have a check raise in them, because when someone is playing tight passively, anyone who's playing passively is unlikely to have check raise. I'd consider that a very aggressive action, which most players don't have in their locker. Unless other than them, they're trying to get tricky and they're misusing it, or something's happened in the hands that has altered their perspective on what they're trying to do. But most players don't have check raise and anywhere near enough check raises. So first things is we need to make sure that they don't have check raises in their locker. Secondly, they've got to be unaware that we're folding out all our bluffs and we're only betting with value. How often do we need them to understand that we do have bluffs in this position, so that they don't start playing perfectly?
This is the thing, like we're assuming that they're making this big exploitable mistake, and obviously we're leaving ourselves up to exploitation if we start adjusting in such a massive way. But I think you do it, and then if they then adjust back, then obviously then we need to adjust again. But at the moment, we're just talking about this is their mistake, and this is how we adjust to exploit it. Like staying balanced and all the rest of it kind of goes out the window when you've got someone making such a huge mistake. I think you just forget about it until, if they show, oh right, now they've realised that you're betting everything and they're just going to check raise everything, then yeah, you need to completely adjust and start treating them as an aggressive player, But at the moment, we're saying that they're a passive player, and we just make that adjustment. Like all these kind of poker relationships evolve, don't they? As you start playing someone and that they do that, so you exploit them. But then after a while, they're going to start exploiting you back because you're not playing GTO, you're playing this massive exploitative strategy. But some players won't. Some players won't really know how to play back at you. They'll just be like, I don't want to play them. They seem to always take my chips.
So what does a tight passive player's range percentage, what's their defending percent?
Oh, I don't know.
Because
I can give you a percentage.
If they're defending 15%, they will have Jack 10 suited in their range and other cards that can completely miss Ace King 6. Yeah. So betting small with range will get enough folds from the bluffing parts of our range, because we're ranging this balanced. So we've got loads of stuff that's nowhere near as good as Jack 10 suited. So they're folding all the stuff that we now don't beat, which is beneficial to us, as well as we're getting the SPR down and we're building a pot when we do have it, compared to if they're only defending the big blinds 5% of the time, they've almost exclusively got Ace King hands, apart from a few of the pocket pairs, of which we're only beating that when we've got value hands as well. We're not beating Queens, Tens, Jacks with anything else other than the Ace King type hands. So should we develop a check behind range for these players? Is there value in check behind, or is there too much value in the small bet with range?
I would say the latter. I think there's too much value in just raising everything, mostly getting folds, and then just knowing almost exactly where you're at if they do call you.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, my thinking when you're talking is that even though they're going to play perfectly against you, you're getting enough better hands to fold with the bet that we're profiting, so that every time they continue, we know they've got an ace or a king, and that's the end of it. Or they might have a pair of sixes, but all the same, we're still losing. So that was our punt. They're winning. We need to either give up there and then or significantly improve. Okay, cool. So I'm enjoying that. The next one is the Ace King 10 boards, where much of what we said, I think, is quite transferable here. So the only change on this board is that the Queen Jack off forms a significant part of the big blinds range. I think, am I right? Is there 12 combos of Queen Jack offsuit? and there's only for 6 combos of suited. So 18 combos in total, but twice as many. And they've also got all the suited hands, the Queen Jack suited as well. But that's not the case. If we're saying that the big blind's not defending anywhere near enough, they don't have Queen Jack off, so it's revert to point A, but with even more caution. I reckon on a Ace King 10 board, we should develop a significant check-in behind range. Even what about the scenario where someone's type passive, where their default out of position move is to check, even with the strongest hands? Are they the type of player to come out betting on the turn when we check behind? Is a type passive player too tight for even that, or actually would we expect donk bets?
Depends what they've got. Yeah, if they've got like a really strong, if they've got 2 pair or the straight,
are they donking?
Then they're probably betting the turn. If we check behind on the flop, then they're probably going to bet the turn. They still understand about getting chips in the pot when they've got it.
I mean, when someone's playing a thinking game and they've got GTO as a consideration, I'd imagine they know the value of checking to the aggressor, letting them do the betting, and then reevaluating on the turn. Even if they've got the absolute nuts, they don't mind that street might go begging. That a donk bet in that position is too polar at that point. They're unnecessarily polarizing their range.
Okay.
Even though that's not a bad thing, you've got the entire range at that point. You should be letting the in position player play their advantage, because it's going to happen often enough that you shouldn't need to donk. But is a generally tight passive player so unaware of that when they have a Queen Jack on an Ace King 10 balls, they just come out betting? Is that because the tight passive players do still get lively when someone lights their wick and they come up trumps? So is that something we should keep an eye out for when they don't donk bet? How often are they doing that with a monster?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say, because some people are almost like a bit aware that they're type passive, and then it's, becomes obvious, and then they do the reverse of what they should, and they just slow play the hell out of stuff, to try and disguise it. It's like they get tricky. They get tricky with it.
Yeah, and then try a 5x all in because they've got to the river and realised they've not got any of the chips in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I think most of our strategy is pretty similar on that. Once you've taken away that nut advantage, not much changes from the Ace King 6 board, other than maybe a bit more caution and a bit more checking behind with hands that have completely missed. Okay, and then the last board is your Ace King King board that should really benefit the big blinds. Is that still the case?
Well, type passive, I mean, yeah, it's Ace King King, so it depends how tight is the answer. If they're so tight that they're not playing any of their kings anymore, like their suited kings, then yeah, it does change things a lot. And actually, maybe the nut advantage shifts to the imposition opener, because he's got kings and aces in his range.
He's playing king suddenly,
yeah, exactly. So it depends. It depends how tight this player is. If they're emitting kings from their range, yeah, absolutely, it's completely changed, because then as soon as they stay in a hand, they've probably got bloody Ace King, or set a trip kings, or a decent ace.
I mean, one thing I'd like to consider on this flop is how often we should be playing this extremely passively, because so much of their board, so much of their range is aces and kings, that even though we might share the nut advantage with them. We just can never, because they're also passive, because this is so much in their favour. It's really difficult for us to maneuver, even if we've got king 8 and there is more of that in our range, and it's more likely we've got that. I don't think it certainly don't allow us to overbet, because when they do have it, they're going to come alive, and then when they don't, they're probably so scared of that board that we've wasted value.
Exactly. But it's the same sort of thing where you kind of want to see bet your entire range just to see, and if they come along, then they've got a piece of it, and when they've got a piece of it, then you judge, well, am I beating them? Like if you're sitting there with a full house, then you bet the absolute hell out of it, because they've not sat there folding everything to then fold, a trip kings. So if you're sitting there with a full house, or a really, really strong king, then yeah, bet the hell out of it, because they'll pay you off.
Sure. So are we still saying, for the most part, it's a small bet with most of our range?
I think this is a quarter to a third pot C bet all day long.
And are we happy to go big when we've got it and stay small?
I think the bets should be the same. It should be consistent on the flop. But once they call the flop,
right,
then
gotcha.
we go really heavy on the turn. Like if we've got it, we go super heavy, and if we've not got it, we just check fold the turn and river. Right. But if we've got a super strong hand and they call the flop, yeah, that's when we get the stacks in.
And I love this kind of this is exploitable, but I know as soon as we're talking through it, as soon as I can hear you go through, okay, do this, do that, do this, I'm like, I even know the player's name. I've seen this scenario, and I didn't have the balls to go nuts at it and just get throw my chips in, overbet, geometric sizing, but it's 2x, and you get it all in by the river because they've just overbet. They've overvalued ace queen on an ace king board, assuming you haven't got it. They can't throw it away. Cool.
But you know they've got that. That's what they've. This is the thing. And I used to play like this myself, like a year ago. I'd be always waiting for those strong hands, and then I'd be like, but why is it when I finally got all my chips in with a pretty good hand, they had an even better one? It's like, now I can just see it as clear as day. It's because I made it obvious that I was only playing with really good hands, and that they were only ever going to put all their chips in when they had a super strong hand. It's just obvious.
Yeah. I mean, somewhat. I mentioned the Saxon Arms, and apologies if any of them ever listen to this. I've played against someone who actually said to me when I remember not in as complex and as well thought out way as this, but I was value betting them because I knew exactly when they had something and what part of it they had, and they're like, "Oh, what can you do?" You know what I mean? Like when you've got a hand like this, and it was something like top pair, top kicker on a pretty connected board. And then they literally just threw their hands in the air. It's just, what can you do? It's like, okay, don't make it obvious when you've got ace king. Is the answer to that, mate. Like,
but they don't realize. That's the thing. You don't realize that when you're in that frame of mind, when you're a bit nervous to play back or to play a wider range, you don't realize you're doing it. You're like, well, they don't know. I could have this. I could have that. It's like, well. It's not even so. It's just you're betting. It's you're not betting so much that when you do bet, they just they can gauge. Well, you've got a strong or very strong hand now, and they just know to either fold, or when they've got the nuts, they'll just get you all in.
Yeah, I do love that, especially when it's you proper step up your exploits. I remember another time down the Saxons when I was doing the same kind of thing but range betting. So I had 5-6 suited, and the flop was fairly high, but they were such an obvious player because, as you said, they're playing such a skewed top heavy range that I had double back doors and there was everything going through it. So I thought, well, I'm in position. Let's see if they're going to call the initial flop bet, and they did, and then the turn improved both my straight and flush potential. So I did another bet, and then they called, and then the river come down, and I hit the flush. So I did a big bet because they're still checking to me every single time. And
Yeah.
then they've called and they've got top pair. They've got a top set. So they had a pair of aces and they've hit their ace, but they didn't improve to a house. And I've hit the flush with 5-6 suited, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe it! You're such a," you know what I mean? Like really getting angry at me. And it's like every stage of that, like was I weren't value betting, but
And there's
it's so
it's almost not too wrong just them calling, but put the brakes on when the stack goes in on and the flush gets there,
exactly.
or just raise big enough earlier, like play back at you and put you to the test.
Yeah. Like they did nothing to define my range and then get upset about why I'm playing with the cards that I am. It's like, but you've allowed me to bet you at every single stage, and you because you're calling that with all of your draws that you've missed. You're calling that with all your straights, calling that with all your bottom pairs.
Yeah.
Because you're just this passive player who doesn't do anything to define hands, and you will call fold as one of your strategies, and that's what I'm taking advantage of. And it just so happens that it weren't call fold, it's call.
Exploit that man.
Anyway, perfect. I think there's a lot that we can take away from that, and a lot that I've learned.
That's great. No, it's really good.
So we have so many other scenarios, and it's only an ace king flop that we've discussed. I mean, it just blows your mind how much you can talk about. We've got loose passive players. We've got players that c bet 100% of the time. Players that will bet their draws and check call, and then try to bluff their draws right on the end, and they do it 100% of the time. If they've missed and they think, oh, there's only one way I'm going to win this pot, so they just bet with complete disregard for what's happened.
Yeah.
People who've got no ability to free bet or will just fold to 80% of free bets. Tight aggressive players, tight passives, loose aggressive players, or like so many. Anyway,
and this is the next thing, though, isn't it? We're getting to a stage, or we're near to it, where we can start thinking about player types, and it'd be nice to sit down and within an hour or two of playing in a tournament, to start being able to say, okay, well, I know what you're doing wrong. This is how I'm going to adjust against you. I know what you're doing wrong. This is what I'm going to do against you. One thing I think, a mistake that I've made there before, and I know other people do, is feeling like they can, like they know the mistakes, and then they just sort of go gun ho at them, like trying to force an exploit on them. The reality is, even when you know what someone's doing wrong, you've still got to wait for the perfect time to exploit them, and that might take quite a long time, and you might not even get a chance to exploit them, because you still need the correct hand in the correct situation to do it. Like if you imagine, like, all right, you might be able to get them to fold a better hand, but that needs to come along. They still need to have, you still need to have a hand that isn't strong enough with showdown value, and they need to have one that they can fold. And equally, like if, especially when it comes to a tight passive player, you need to wait for them to have a strong hand when you've got a monster. That might not come along. Or sorry, that's not the only thing you need to wait for. Obviously, the other thing is you can over bluff them and get them to fold a lot. But it's all about waiting for that time and being very patient. And sometimes it can be frustrating, and you know a player's doing something wrong. You know what the exploit is, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're not quite getting the right situations to exploit them. And there'll be other players that end up taking them out, and you just have to let that go. So but it's definitely the next stage, isn't it? Understanding mistakes in others and starting to be able to exploit them on the fly.
Yeah, I get sad where I realise that most of this is paying attention to hands you're not in, and knowing that that's probably my biggest barrier to significantly improving.
Start off basic, Tain. I mean, just tell yourself, right, I'm going to make sure I watch one hand every 10, 15 minutes, or one hand every blind level that I'm not involved in. I'm going to make sure, and then put all your focus into that one hand. That's a start, isn't it? Because no one sits there and watches every single hand. No one does.
Yeah, I need to do that.
I
mean, what's probably
when I'm playing online, I watch telly. Like I'll play it and I'll just I've got ace king, and then I'll play it. And obviously, when you get nearer final tables, you start paying a lot more attention. But if I'm playing MTT, no one's, I don't know, maybe they are, but I'm not sitting there analysing everything that's going on and working out what these player types are. Not really.
I mean, one thing I did notice that I didn't even realise was an exploit I could gain from that. So I had a little flutter with DTO. If anyone's unaware, it's like a GTO training tool. So it's not like a solver. They use solver scenarios and ranges to create like a training situation. So it's almost like you're playing live, but you get to evaluate your hands. The number of times I've tried to input the values of hands that I've been up against, and it says you can't go any further. This is deviating from GTO, and it's basic stuff. So just for instance, a mid position raise button call, and then it goes to the big blinds, and it's like you've not got any range to make an action at this point, or something like that. Or there's other actions where any limps, and all of a sudden there's no range in this position. I'm like, oh, I would never would have considered that the minute I've seen something as simple as bet limp free bet, or that there is no double limp in that position. As soon as you've seen that, you can make evaluations based on that action, that no one ever sitting in the button will be limping behind without a significant exploit reading. And we've only been at this table for 6 hands, so I can already evaluate that player as someone who's passive, or someone who's calling too often, someone who's playing too wide. Cool. I mean, more to look into, but I appreciate that. I love how it's just such a tiny little portion, one tiny player, tiny, and we generalize in what the exploits are because we get to do that. But the truth is that players aren't as perfectly defined as this, so it's so much more.
You kind of got to look for what their very specific exploit might be.
Yeah, although I do have some of that. Sorry, people down in Saxons, I've defined some of you. Let me never speak of it again.
Your name's in Martin's little black book.
Yeah, they're going to tell you it is. Some people, I think I have actually told someone what their exploit, what their leak is, and they don't know what to do to change it. Like I joke, I digress with them. Although one of the other players.
What did you tell them? Like, this is what you're doing wrong. How did they take it?
No, you just joke, and it's just like, it's like, you only ever play pocket pairs in that position, mate. Like, it was so obvious what you had. And then 6 hands later, pocket pairs, that position, and all of a sudden they're throwing the cards around again. It's like, oh, for goodness sake, like, how obvious does it need to be? But then saying that, one of the other players really surprised me, where he used to be a cards turned up player. When he's got it, when it's strong, he's betting. When he hasn't, and he's learning. Like, I didn't even realise he was putting in the hours, but I played against him again like a month later, and he's raising ace-3 suited under the gun, and he's calling bets with not backdoors per se. And I'm not sure what level he's playing to, but he's definitely making moves and exploiting the fact that people expect him to be playing cards up, and he was doing that really well. So yeah, I do need to keep my eyes open to the players that do adjust and don't tell me about it.
I love it. The whole poker world's learning and improving too.
Cool. Just hope they never listen to this pod. But I hope everyone else does, because we love you. Please comment.
Yeah, we love you, man. Thanks very much for listening, everyone.
And appreciate it. Cheers for all your good advice there, John.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Shane. Always a pleasure. Until next time.
Thanks, everyone.